I want to start off by saying, like, I'm no Blender expert. All right, I'm only maybe one or two steps ahead of you on the path of learning. So, like, you know, uh, you know, I may, I'm going to show you what I've kind of figured out is kind of like the easier way to get started. The most important thing here is like Blender is an incredibly complex program. You can do amazing things with it, and people have made full-blown movies with it. You might have seen the splash screen with the cat from the movie Flow on the latest version of Blender. That was made entirely in Blender. So you can 3D model, you can texture, you can animate. There's even a built-in video editor. There's a built-in image editor. Because it's open source and free, people have just been putting stuff in it for a very long time. And it's gotten so good that it now is popping up in like, big studios and big productions and replacing things like Maya and 3D Studio Max and other tools like that. And the fact that it's open source means anybody can add to it. It's also free, which makes it incredibly appealing. I think the point is that don't be too daunted by the complexity. Like, there's the 80-20 rule, which is that like 80% of your time is going to be spent with 20% of the features. So don't worry about the other 80% of features. Like, find the thing that works for you, and eventually it'll grow. One of the things that one of the first things I kind of struggled with when I was looking at this was like, oh, I've been teaching you how to use Unity. You've probably gotten used to some of the controls and shortcuts for Unity. Maybe I could, show you how to set it up so it's more familiar. But then I took pause and said, that's kind of a bad idea. One, you're still early on. But two, there's a ton of resources for Blender that expect you to use the default key bindings for Blender. And if you go in and you make a bunch of crazy customizations to make it act like Unity from the very get-go, it might work against you more than for you. So I think that what we're going to do is we're going to use the default key bindings and the default shortcuts. Of course, so it was when I surveyed you, the majority of the people surveyed said that they'd be interested in the things we already covered, and Blender came in third. We did the Game Master in the previous class, and this Blender was highly rated as like, yeah, that'd be really good to know. I'm actually not going to show you texturing. I've decided just to focus on the basics of controls and two different types of modeling, hard surface modeling and kind of the sculpting, which is more like soft surface. So you've already downloaded Blender. And so I'm going to show you that, like, for navigation and for tools, there's just a couple of shortcuts that are worth knowing. So let's just get right into the program itself. I actually have on my laptop, I didn't realize I have a slightly older version of Blender, but most of the things should be pretty much the same. So when you start, you've got that splash screen. You can just click past it, and you start out with like a scene that has a cube, and it also has a camera and a light. And that's about as basic as it gets. Yes, exactly. And that really just comes down to which one of these things up at the top it opens. So if I say File New, General, I get the exact same stuff. So yes. And so the first thing we want to do is just get a sense for like, all right, how can I do the basic things that I expect to do in a 3D world? How can I navigate the world? And the thing is, like, a lot of Blender tutorials will kind of immediately start throwing shortcuts and key combinations, key bindings at you. Like, I think you can learn those along the way. So I'm going to try to avoid that. There's just a couple of things that you can learn that will give you the majority of what you need to get by. The first thing is that you can use the middle mouse button to click and rotate around, orbit around whatever you're focused on. So and then the middle mouse button, you can also scroll to zoom in and out. So like, all right, you're like, okay, wait, if I can orbit around the thing that I'm looking at and I can zoom in and out, there's just one more of the basic things that I need to know, which is how do I pan? And by holding down Shift and dragging the middle mouse button, you can pan. So, give those a try. And now you'll notice if you ever forget that for whatever reason, These buttons here on the side do the same thing. Like if I click on this one, I can zoom in, and this is actually smooth compared to the kind of stepped version of the middle mouse button. This, you can click to move it or pan the scene around. This quickly snaps you into the camera view so you can know if I do a render, this is what's going to come out because that's what the camera is looking at. And then this one at the bottom allows you to switch between perspective and isometric. So, and the other thing you'll notice is that, all right, much like Unity, you have the lines, the X, Y, and Z axes. It's actually slightly different, which is in Unity, Y is up, and here Z is up. But don't worry about messing with that or changing it. What you do is when you export, you can actually tell the object you're exporting, change those around to fit Unity's paradigm. So don't try to change the editor. Don't try to change Blender. But you can actually click inside this thing to orbit around. You can also click it to snap to these top, side views, top view. And so that can be really useful. So now one of the other, there's another way, I said, hey, I'm not going to teach you keyboard shortcuts, but there is, the other thing you can do here is you can use the numeric keypad. So it may not work for you on the laptop, but when you get home on your desktop, like I have a numeric keypad on my laptop, and if you click the numeric keypad 7, you'll look down from the top. You'll click 1, you look at it down the y-axis, 3 down the x-axis. So that's like, when you look at the numeric keypad, that's top, side, front. Now these other buttons, 8 and 2, 4 and 6, will actually rotate around because this is a fairly common thing to do. Now there's one key here that's actually super useful because everything I kind of showed you, you could do with this or something else, but the period key on the numeric keypad is focus. So whatever you have selected, so if I select the camera, for example, I press the period key on the numeric keypad, it focuses in. That's the equivalent of the F key in Unity. And so that can be super useful, especially as your scene starts to grow. And so those are the most important things to know in terms of like your standard navigation controls. You'll eventually learn some of the other shortcuts for doing that. A lot of times, like for example, you can see that if I click on view, you've got some of the shortcuts here, like frame selected, the period. That's the same thing as this. So if I were to click, you can click on objects either here in the scene or here in the scene collection, which is kind of like the hierarchy in Unity. But yeah, so if you ever forget frame selected, I want to frame the cube, frame selected, and you can see that the shortcut's numpad, period. Any questions on basic navigation? Cool. You can see where it's really vital to use a mouse. Like if you're trying to use like the trackpad on a laptop or something, like you're going to have a hard time. The other thing to know about Blender is, Blender can be a very powerful computer, but it expects a certain amount of resources. If you're running on a potato, then like don't be surprised if it hangs every once in a while. Like if you do an operation and you find that Blender's not responding, just let go and wait a second. And most of the time, it's pretty good about eventually like catching up. Especially there's things when you're switching between modes or you're doing something that like you're increasing the polygons on something. It might choke for a second, but be patient with it. It normally doesn't crash. It's pretty stable, but it can need a moment to catch up, especially on a slower computer. All right, so one of the next things that I'd like to go over is actually the different view modes. So you can see right now, we can see that, we've kind of got a shaded, cube here based on our lighting. Because the lighting's over here, this side's kind of darker. And that is really controlled by like these four things here. So you can see if you hover over, like it says, of course, the tooltips are your friend. So here I can see like all these control viewport shading, and this one in particular gives me wireframe. So if I click on it, then it'll change to seeing through your object. If I click the next one, so this one is solid, so is what we were seeing before. This one is material preview, which means if you have a material, it'll show that in the viewport. Now, this is a prime example of like, okay, when you click that, it might take a second before it changes, and we don't really have a material there, so it's not showing it. The last one is the rendered view, which could take a second, but if you had a complex scene here with lots of materials and stuff like that and lighting, you could actually see kind of a preview of what the render would look like based on clicking that one. But note that that's fairly, it's going to slow down your computer, something that you wouldn't probably leave on and do a lot of editing with. Chances are you will leave it on this one, which is the solid view. Now there's a button over here next to it that says toggle X-ray, which you're like, well, it's kind of similar to showing wireframe, but what it is, and actually when you show wireframe, you can see it highlights it automatically. And you're like, well, wait, aren't these two the same thing? One of the reasons why you would use this regularly and why you can quickly toggle on X-ray, one thing, you kind of still see kind of a see-through version of the cube. But when you're trying to select things that are behind the object that you can't see, you need to turn on either wireframe or this X-ray mode, or else you won't be able to select them. And we'll get into that in just a second. So we will come back to that. So we have our cube here. Now, a very common thing to get messed up with early on is you see this thing that kind of looks like a life preserver. You can also note it over here. This is the cursor. And the cursor allows you to you can put the cursor somewhere, and you can use that position of the cursor to rotate around or do transformations around. In the beginning, you're probably going to accidentally move it and accidentally click it and stuff like that. Don't worry too much about it. In general, in the very beginning, I would focus on like trying to avoid mucking with the cursor. You'll eventually find out how useful it can be, but in the beginning, you'll very often accidentally move it because it's not hard to do. Like when you're in this cursor selection mode, you can click on it and move it. So speaking of selection modes, you can see that like, by default, you have the ability to draw a square region to select something. But also underneath here, there's other methods to select, like using a circle or using a lasso. So, being able to select things makes a lot more sense when we have multiple things. So let's first go over some of these other controls that you're familiar with from Unity. Like you have move, rotate, and scale, which do precisely what you expect them to. So if I have something selected, when I have the move tool selected, you see the familiar kind of gizmo, right? So if I select the move tool, and I select, even if I don't have an object selected, I can still click it with this selected. Now I can move it along, the x-axis, Control Z, move it along the y-axis, Control Z, move it on the z-axis. But also you have these, you can see, I keep doing that unintentionally because my Unity shortcut is kicking in. You see you have these squares in between, for example, like, the Z and the X, and that allows you to move it without moving it on the Y. You can move it so it stays in the plane of the X and Z. And then if you were to grab it in the middle, you're kind of free moving it based on how the camera's positioned in the viewport. And so you get the same kind of thing with the rotation tool. So you can rotate. in any of the three axes, and you can do the same with scaling. And this last one combines all three. So if you find that you're quickly changing between scaling, rotating, and moving, you've got a gizmo that combines all three into one gizmo. So in order to, we can go to move, and in order to kind of demonstrate some of like selection and moving things around, what you can do is, I want to duplicate this, let's see, I think I can just Control-C, Control-V. Yeah. So with a cube selected, if you do Control-C, Control-V, it pastes it right into place. So go ahead and create a couple of cubes and then pull them out. So now you can play around with, okay, I can zoom in and out, I can rotate around, and then I can see that my selection, because it's set to rectangle, allows me to select groups of them. And just like in Unity and in many other software, if you click on one and then you hold Shift and click on the other, it'll add to that selection. And then hold a Shift again, you can remove one from the selection. It doesn't do, unlike Unity and other like Windows software, for example, Control doesn't allow you to select something else. So that's the one thing to know. When you want to add to a selection or remove from a selection, you want to use Shift. And you can always experiment with like, okay, well, what does a circle mean? It isn't drawing with a circle. It's more like painting your selection. So for example, if I click off, so I have nothing selected, I have the circle, select circle. If I click and drag, when I go over something, it selects it. And then I can go over here, and then let go, and I have that selected. So that's the difference between circle. And then you have this lasso thing as well, which will allow you to draw, a shape that encompasses something and select things with that. So, and you might think that's kind of weird in this context, but when you have a 3D mesh that's very dense and has a lot of vertices, these different selection methods actually become really super useful. Something else I should have mentioned when we were doing translating things, it's like, let's say you're starting to move something along, in the world, and you realize like, oh, this isn't what I want to do. I want to cancel out of this. Just tap the right mouse button. So if you start doing something, you're like, no, that's totally the wrong way to go. Clicking the right mouse button will like cancel what you're currently doing. So that's super useful to know as well. Cool. Anybody have any questions at this point? All right. Well, let's get into, so as I mentioned, you have everything that's in your scene is represented here in the scene collection. And you can do the same with like kind of, Control or Shift clicking here. So yeah, Control clicking actually works here. It doesn't work here. Don't ask me why. You can hit Delete to get rid of things. So now if you want to add something to your scene, you have this Add menu here. And you can see these are all the things that you can add, and there's a ton, of course. But chances are what you're looking for is under Mesh. So there's plane, cube, circle, UV sphere, cylinder. So for example, if you click on something like that, and you can bring a cylinder into the world. Now this is where I know less about, but I'm pretty sure there are ways to adjust the properties of your thing over here. I think it's, let's see. Actually, I think what I'm looking for is here. Is it? well, we have it, the transform locate. So, you know, you have this menu here that pops out. Let's see, and I think I actually don't even know how to collapse it now. I think it's N. Wait, yeah. The shortcut for that is N, but like if it's open, I'm not really sure how you close it besides pressing N. But basically, when you have something, you know, for whatever object you have selected, these things down here are all many different ways that you can affect either the object or like the scene. So these are a lot of your properties. So you know you can kind of see like, okay, you know, this first tab is all about your scene and the resolution of your scene and such. You know, here this is for moving things around in your tools. Here is where you would choose the rendering engine that renders the image. Here, there's more information about your scene and, like, for example, animation frames. You know, just flipping through some of these, like, so the white stuff has to do with the scene. So here's about like the world in your scene, like what kind of background will be in your render. Let's see. Here is our cylinder transform, rotation, and scale. Let's see. This is actually super interesting and super powerful as you get into it, which is there's a ton of modifiers you can add to an object that allow you to do changes to it that are non-destructive. So in other words, like you can change this object in many interesting and different ways using modifiers, but if you ever want to go back, you just remove the modifier. Or if you want to change it, you can adjust the parameters of the modifier. So this is something that you'll come back to later. It's not something I'm going to go into now. Let's see. So there's, you know, things like, you know, cloth simulations and force fields and stuff like that. Let's see. This is the tab where you would add a material to this, which I said we're not going to go into. And this is for brushes. So let's see. What I want to do next is to let's delete anything that we have currently in our scene. Yeah, exactly. Like just to reduce the noise in the scene. And then what we'll do is we'll add mesh cube, which brings us right back to kind of where we started from. But something, you know, so you may not remember, or you might have missed this class, but in the intro class, in Unity, we used some software called, or we used a package called ProBuilder, which is kind of like the first introduction that I gave you to how to do 3D modeling. And I told you, like, okay, at a certain point, you're going to graduate from ProBuilder, and you'll just find you want to do more complex objects and you want to do them more professionally. And so you might upgrade to Blender. And so what I'm going to show you now is essentially kind of how you do some of those similar things that we did in ProBuilder, but in Blender. So now up to this point, in Blender, we've been in object mode. And that's where you generally are creating multiple objects and you're setting up a scene. But if you want to do modeling of a specific object, for example, let's say I wanted to take this cube and turn it into a low poly character. So what I would do is starting from a cube, something that's an approximation of a starting point, I can switch from object mode to edit mode. And so now you can see that the view changed a little bit. Now I've got some orange outline. I can see the vertices in orange. And also these three things appeared. So by default, we're in vertex selection mode. Next to it is edge selection mode and then face selection. So now with vertex selection mode selected, you can see I can draw around this vertex. And you can see now I only have that vertex selected. Now if I use the move tool, I can pull that vertex up. Now with 3D, you always want to, if you think you've done something, you always want to like orbit around what you're doing. You're a sculptor and you need to see your sculpture from all angles. If you only look at it from one angle, you're going to have a hard time. So I'll undo that. Now to give you an example of how to move an edge, switch to edge mode, click on an edge, or I can use the rectangle, select it. Now I'm pulling up an edge, and you see how that has the effect. So I can undo that. Now if I switch to the third mode, which is face selection mode, and I click on any of the faces of this cube, now I can move the face. I can move it, in any of these axes. So that's how you can move around. You can pull points, you can pull edges, you can pull faces to start to get things in the shape that you want them. But chances are at a certain point, you're going to need to add more geometry to get what you want. So for example, let's start in face selection mode. Let's select the face on the top. Now there's essentially kind of three shortcuts or three key controls that will give you access to the broadest range of things that you're going to need. They're all context sensitive. If I now, with this face selected, if I right click, I've got the most commonly used commands for working with a face being one of the polygons. So you can see subdividing a face, extruding face along normals. So these are the most common things that you might do to a face. So if I choose extrude face, now you can see that I'm pulling up, and it looks like at first you might not notice that you're actually creating more geometry. Like you're not just pulling up the face that's there. You can see these lines here. And now this face here, you can pull it out and stretch it. So now if I were to, for example, select a face on the side and do the same thing and pull it out, you can see, okay, well, wait, like I'm starting, I've created this shape here. I could do the same over here, extrude face and pull it out. I'm starting to get like a Roblox character. If I just give it a little bit of a head, I've got a Roblox character. But if you're going to create a character, you want it to be symmetrical. And there's a way to do that. So if you go back, Control Z to where you have, just the first extrusion that you made, you'll note up here, this section here is the mesh symmetry controls for X, Y, and Z. So if we wanted something to be symmetrical on the X plane, let me see, I think this is going to work. No, I think that I always kind of screw this up. Let's see. No, it's not that one. Is it this one? I think I know what it is. I think that I think it doesn't work with extrusions. It only works with translation. So for example, let me say if I grab this here and I've got this set to X. So now you see that it's like when I'm pulling just one of them, the other one's pulling out automatically and in sync. And I do think that there's a way to have it work in terms of extrusion. Let's see, if I grab the face, well, one thing I can do is I can grab this face, and I can go around to the other side and hold Shift and grab this face. So I've got the two arms I want to create. Now if I right click and do not extrude faces, but extrude faces along normals. So do you know what a normal is? So the normal is essentially like if you have a square here on the wall, the normal is the line that points out from that square, that points out from the polygon. And so when I extrude along normals, I'll go out in the direction of the face of the normal. So on this side, the normal faces this way, but on this side, it faces the opposite direction. And so now, because I have symmetry, if I select just this one, now I can adjust this. And of course, if I select this face here and I do an extrude face, it's not affected by the symmetry because it's already symmetrical in the X.
I think I lost where how we got the symmetry going.
Oh, absolutely. So symmetry is up here, and here I'll step back through it. So what we did first is we can have symmetry. So symmetry in the x means like something on this side is going to equal something on this side. So if you have symmetry in the x selected, if for example you grab this edge, you see that it also moves the other edge. So does that work for you? So yeah, get to the point where you've got you got your Roblox character, which is like, all right, I can right click, extrude along normals and pull this out, click this top, extrude this up. And so now one of the things I wanted to show you was that, like, let's say that you wanted to select all the faces here in the body all the way around. So, I've got faces selected. If I draw this like this, you'll see that I've selected these faces, but if you look around on the backside, you didn't select the ones on the backside. But you want to. Let's say that, you were going to do some operation that you're going to expand everything or something like that. So this is where that X-ray mode comes into play. So if I toggle the X-ray mode, you'll see that I can see through this thing. And now when I do my drag select, I'm selecting all the way around. And as always, it's super important to, pan around and validate that you have what you think you have. So for example, at this point, if I right click and I did, let's see, like subdivide or something like that. If I wanted to add more geometry so I could sculpt this or something like that. So basically, yeah, if you find that you're trying to select something on the back side, that's when you kick in this X-ray mode. So cool. Let's see. I would say I want to give you 5 minutes to kind of play around, grok that. Let me know if you have questions or something that you get stuck on, because I want you to have an opportunity to practice this before we move on to the next part, which we're going to do some sculpting with a more complex 3D object. But you can see where, you can really, if you're the kind of person who really loves to noodle with things. So for example, if I wanted to select these two edges, and let's say I wanted to make him, have a neck that kind of comes together, one thing you could do is you could select this one, move it over here, select this one, move it over here. But if you wanted to make it perfectly even, you could either select the face and scale the face, or you can also have these two selected and scale them, and it actually brings them closer together, which is a nifty kind of thing. Another thing you might have noticed is that if you select a face and then switch to edge selection, it automatically selects the edges that were along that face. So if for some reason you're trying to do an operation involving the edges, if it's easier to select the face first and then convert that to the edges or to the vertices, you can do that. Because for example, you're like, well, why would I want to do that? You might do something like beveling the vertices, which has this effect. That's not something you get from doing an operation on that face, but it's something that you can do by beveling the vertices. So there are reasons why you would want to do that. But essentially, use extrusion and then moving around edges, faces, and vertices to get yourself something like a character. And see if you get in the position where you're kind of stuck or having trouble understanding things. I always wind up accidentally doing like a Unity shortcut, and I'm like, ah. Although there is, if you find yourself clicking on things and then going over here and clicking on things and going over here. And you're like, I'm not ready to learn a shortcut, but it'd be wonderful if there was a way to more quickly select one of these things. One of the other tools I mentioned, like you can get access to a lot of commands by right-clicking on something. Spacebar is another thing that brings up some pretty cool controls. So for example, if I wanted to, if I click on this face and I want to move it, instead of having to go over here and click the move command, if I hit the space bar, actually, I'm set up in the old way. Let me actually change my preferences. Let's see, what is it? I think that, yeah, spacebar action should be tools. You should have this automatically. So because you're on a newer version of Blender, this is now the default. But if you select a face and then hit spacebar, you immediately get a bunch of things which includes move, rotate, scale, and transform. So rather than having to go all the way over here to select it, you can click on this, hit spacebar, and not only can you select move, rotate, scale, and transform, you also have things like, insert faces, bevel, some of the more common commands that are used here. Some of them appear in the right-click window as well. And the other thing that's cool about this is that it can help you learn the shortcut keys because they're here. So because the only shortcut key you need to remember right now is spacebar. And then if I wanted to scale this, I could scale it. And then I switch to move it. Let's see. Oh, I have move. And then, switch to rotate. And so that's a relatively quick way to be able to get access to the commands you need by only having to remember spacebar. And if I may overload your brain a little bit more, there's one final thing that is like a very common and easy to remember tool, which is tab. Let's see. Actually, it's not set up here by default again because I'm using an older version, but let's see. I think that, all right, tab for pie menu. There we go. Your default when you hit tab is that you'll see this, which is known as the pie menu. And this thing, you'll see that I can easily jump from edit mode to object mode, for example. And you can actually do this with a gesture. Like if you tap it and flick in a direction, that's why this is set up the way it is. So you can jump between the modes using tab. So in addition to knowing that, like, okay, middle mouse button, right mouse button, holding shift, space bar, and tab. Like, forget all the other crazy combinations. You'll learn those along the way. But those basic ones, space bar, tab, shift, right mouse, middle mouse, like that's enough to get you a lot of the things that you would need to do. Yeah, I mean, the way I learned to do 3D was just to sit down without any particular thing that I was wanting to create and doodle. When you sit down with a piece of paper and a pen, you just kind of doodle, you draw some circles, you draw some lines. Like, I think that if you're trying to sit down and make something specific, you might get frustrated. But by sitting down and just doodling, by trying out things like, oh, I'm just going to make a kind of fun freeform shape. What if I throw this shape in? What if I, tweak this stuff in this way? That's the best way to learn because you won't get demotivated or frustrated. If you find that something's you're not understanding, just come back to it later. And if you really want to do something specific, that's a prime opportunity to pull up ChatGPT and say, hey, I'm in Blender 4.4 and I'm trying to do this, but this is what's happening. It'll get you out of a lot of stuck positions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one of the Blender tutorials that people always reference is a Blender tutorial that this guy made, and he updated it for every version, and it's making a donut.
Yeah, I was thinking about the donut.
So the donut, yeah, and so that's, it's kind of the fundamental beginner Blender tutorial is the making the donut.
I feel like anyone who's like regular Blender always found the donut video. It's like so.
Many have. I actually think it's a bit more advanced. I don't think it's a great total newbie tutorial. I actually think something like, just the basics of like something like this is a bit less daunting.
I think the owners kind of like a full like crash course in a way because they get like not only learn the essentials, but you can have like make product.
Yep.
So it's trial by fire a little bit.
It is, and he goes through everything. He adds modifiers. He adds, he uses some complex techniques to get the icing to adhere to the donut, and then goes into texturing and rendering and all those kind of things, which I actually got stuck a couple times on.
Yeah, it's fun doing those tutorials. It's like you see it done, and then you try to replicate it. And say, oh, it's not as instant as it fun tutorial in reality.
It's funny. There's several. That tutorial is so common. Let's see. Let me see. Blender donut tutorial. Yeah, this guy. And he's done so, and to make the donut is like, I don't know, like 6 or 8 videos or something. Yeah, you can see that I don't have the YouTube Premium or whatever. But yeah, like I did find it kind of hard to follow at a certain point, and I found that like it wasn't working. And he's got a Discord where he talks about it. But yeah, like let's see, he goes over the basics. Actually, the first couple of videos are actually quite good as far as the basics before he actually goes into the making of the donut itself. But you can see, like, there's quite, or this is the chapters of this video, but he's got, a bunch of other videos. But yeah, so you made a cool character. Now go back to object mode and delete it. Uh-huh.
Would it be okay if I leave around 7?
Absolutely not. You must stay to the end of class or you'll get a grade of failing. No, we very much appreciate you coming by, and you're absolutely welcome to leave at any point.
Because I have like 2.5 hour training.
Oh, yeah.
That's brutal. Yeah, no, feel free.
Yeah.
No problems about that whatsoever. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm not very much Blender.
Oh,
I'm more
that's important too. All right, so now let's go. We're in object mode in Blender, and so what we're going to do is we're going to try out sculpting, which is a kind of a totally different approach. What you were just doing is what we often refer to as hard surface modeling, where you're really doing things like making buildings or trucks or weapons or things that tend to be kind of faceted. But what we'll do now is we'll add a mesh, and one of the things what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you start out with a cube because I want to show you something about sculpting. That's one of the things that you might trip over from the get-go. So you'll see that like along the top here, I mean, you have file, edit, render, window, and help. Those are your basics. But then these are the different modes that you might use based on the type of task you're trying to perform. So we've been working in layout mode or modeling mode. But the next one is sculpting. You also see there's one for video editing and the shading, rendering, compositing. So if we go to sculpting, we still have our cube, but now like the grid background is gone and we've got like these tools around here. And so now what we're gonna do, think of this more as like digital clay or silly putty or like, Play-Doh, like kids Play-Doh. And so you've got your cube here, and if you you've got these different brushes that you can use, like for example the draw, or like clay strips or clay thumb or inflate or whatnot. Now if we click on this and we click on our cube, nothing happens. But look, there's this image over here that's like it should do this. But no matter, I can, maybe it's the strength. No, there's not, it's not the strength. Maybe it's the radius. I'll make this thing keep bigger. oh, well, now it's finally starting to do some stuff. Now, the reason why you're not getting what you expect you get is because you don't have enough data on this mesh to sculpt something. Like you've got a very primitive object that only has 6 faces and like this limited amount of vertices. Basically, like you really need, if you look at this, there's only these handful of vertices and you're trying to affect them, and you can, but it's not going to give you the experience you're looking for. You really need more mesh data. So there's a better way of doing this, is instead of starting with a cube like this, we can go back to, you can jump between sculpting mode and modeling mode or layout mode. You can also do that here. And you can even be sculpting in this view. This is a view that's made for sculpting. But let's go back to object mode. Let's get rid of this. And instead, let's start from an object that is much more complicated. Like, for example, this icosphere. Now, you can already see that this is like, it almost looks like a 20-sided die. It's very faceted. And if we go into our viewport shape, the wireframe mode, you can see there's a lot more triangles, there's a lot more vertices, a lot more data to work with here. So now, if we go to sculpting, we select this brush, we make the strength not insane, and we bring down the radius. As we start to push on this, let me give my strength a little bit more. You're starting to see it affect the mesh much more. And now I'm starting to see, okay, like as I pivot around it, I see, okay, well, it is pulling things out and starting to deform the mesh in ways that is more like stretching it out in elastic in clay. But there's actually a better way of working with this. If we Control Z back to where we started from, let's see. When you're in sculpting mode, there's an option. Let's see. And where is it hidden at now? I think that I remember seeing this. Okay, there it is. So instead of going to the sculpting tab, from the modeling tab, choose sculpt mode. Now there's this thing over here that says Dyne Topo. And what that means is dynamic topology. And if you turn it on, it says, yeah, it won't preserve colors. Yeah, we don't care. What dynamic topology does is, as you're sculpting on something, it will add more geometry to help it grow. So rather than, if you're not using dynamic topology, as you're pulling on and stretching out these vertices, it's not adding new vertices to account for that. It's just stretching them and making them further away. But if we turn on Dyne Topo, as we start to adjust things, you see how you get a lot of smaller triangles in there? So it's adding additional geometry dynamically to give you what you're expecting. And this is actually really smart, because it means that it's only adding geometry as you need it. And it's always keeping the mesh as light and flexible and low poly as it can. So you can see that when I turn on dynamic topology and I start adding to it using this draw brush, now it feels like I'm kind of modeling with clay, pulling things out, and I'm starting to get a much more organic shape. And so, you can see where it's like, all right, like now I'm starting to look like some kind of scary brain creature from Starship Troopers or something. But you can see that over here on the side we haven't been working with, it still has the kind of, big obvious triangles. But where we've been building with our sculpting, we've got this, it's adding more complex geometry. And if we switch over to our wireframe, we can see that. So you can see it started out as very limited, So now, I think one of the other things, let's see, there's another thing I wanted to show you, and I think, where is it hiding here? This might be one of those things. I bet it's on the new version. Let me see. Yes. So what I don't have, actually, maybe it's hiding over here. What I'm looking for, oh, there it is. All right, so hiding over here for me, there's this thing called remesh. Now, even for dynamic topology, adding more geometry as you need, sometimes it helps to do what's called remesh, which is it recalculates to optimize the mesh and make it work better. And I think for you, this will actually, let's see. So I'm not sure why I don't get a button. Oh, well, I wonder if it's, no, I have it selected. For you,
I turned off dynamic topology.
Maybe dynamic topology means it remeshes automatically. So if I uncheck that, I don't get that. So what I expected to happen and what worked for me at home was when even with dynamic topology turned on, I was able to click so it's disabled. The remesher cannot run with DynoTopo activated. So it literally tells you that. But even, oh, there it is. I kind of expected that to turn blue for some reason. So yeah, they kind of do the same thing to some degree. But remesh is a way to kind of like take the entire mesh. If you find that you've developed your mesh and it's starting to look really blocky and faceted and you're wondering like, couldn't this look a little bit smoother? Try turning it off and do it running remesh on it.
Will this be a lower, computationally less demanding thing to have in the game? So if we do go in and do dynamic topology to get it just the way we want it, it might introduce more vertices that we don't really want to deal with, and this will reduce that.
Oh, what, remeshing? Well, remeshing is adding data. And it's kind of smoothing it out. So, but what you would do is, in general, you would build in Blender to make it look as good as you want. And then there are operations you can run that will actually simplify the exported mesh and take that additional data and create what's called a normal map from it. And what a normal map does is it creates a texture that simulates all of that additional detail. So that's the usual trick for how you get a mesh that looks complicated but is actually more lightweight.
Okay, so you don't really bother with that in this stage.
Exactly. At this stage, you're really just kind of modeling for what you want to, how you want it to look. And then there are tools that help you create the most optimized version of that. And that's what also like ZBrush does and other things. Now, one of the challenges that you're going to face when you're working with stuff like this is if you intend to animate the thing that you're creating, then the way that the lines run, like the topology, actually matters. And that's something that just to know, like when you're creating something that isn't going to be animated, that's static, you don't worry too much about like the actual direction that the lines run, that the edges and such run. But when you go to animate something, especially a character, then those creases and those places where you're going to actually kind of fold and bend the mesh, that's actually something that does matter. Now, modern software, modern 3D software is getting to the point where it handles that stuff for you. So you can focus on it, like you can just focus on making something that looks cool and it will create a mesh that works properly. And actually, a lot of times when you are building something in Blender, you're not necessarily starting, if you want to build a character in Blender, the smartest thing is not to start with a cube or a cylinder or a sphere or capsule. There's literally, you can start with like a mannequin. You can literally start with like, the starting point of something that looks humanoid. It looks like a blank mannequin and you can control the face and stuff like that. And so like I have a iPad app, it's called Nomad Sculpt. and it does, like, you can draw on it, and it's a 3D program on iPad. It's a one-time purchase of like 20 euros or something, but it's great for that and allows you to do. So if you're really into 3D modeling, you might check out like Nomad Sculpt on iPad or other kind of solutions. And kind of like I showed you with, so if I were, for example, to go back to object mode and just ditch this, and then if I wanted to do like let's say if I started from a cube, we knew that that would be problematic if it doesn't have enough data. But if I go into edit mode, I select all the faces and I triangulate them, not triangulate, I subdivide. So if I subdivide and then subdivide again, you see what I've done is I've added more squares to this thing. So now this thing should actually work a little better if I go to sculpting mode. But in sculpting mode, I can do the mirroring just like I did in that other modeling mode. So now if I'm like developing something over here, see it's already over here as well. So if I turn on Dino-Topo, reduce the radius of my brush a bit. And so when I'm creating something over here, it's mirrored over here. And if I want that to work on the other axes as well, I can do that as well. Now, one of the things to also note is that like you have a bunch of tools here that work in different ways, and it's fun to experiment with them. So for example, clay will, work in a different way where you're kind of like chipping away at this thing to the point where I'm actually, it almost pretty much turns it into a sphere. There's also, for example, inflate does what you'd expect it would do. When you turn up the strength of this a lot, then you really start to see.
What did you put to subdivide?
So yeah, when I was in the original, so if I go back to here and I bring in a cube, what I do is I go to edit mode, and then I select all the faces. Let's see, and I'll want an X-ray to make sure I have them all. I think you could also like Control A, maybe not. If you right click with the face thing selected, actually the thing at the very top is subdivide. And I can actually do that like twice to give me enough faces to work with that the sculpting works a little better. But you can also see because note that when I'm in sculpt mode and I do a bunch of sculpting, just because I'm in sculpt mode doesn't mean that I now can't go back to pulling and pushing vertices in edit mode. I can jump back to edit mode and I can, actually move faces and move vertices and edges. So just because you're sculpting doesn't mean you can no longer do the edit mode stuff. And when you could start by building a rough sketch of something in edit mode, go into sculpt mode and give it that high definition that you're looking for. Cool, huh? So yeah, I definitely recommend that you just experiment with some of these different, I think like you can see that you can actually go down here and like this snake hook thing, for example. Here, I should turn on Dino-Topo in order to, okay. So you can see I can just pull off tendrils like this with the snake hook. And you can see where if like you were making, something very kind of spooky and organic, that could work quite well. I think for me, the biggest challenge is understanding like, okay, when I'm, based on my perspective and how I'm looking at it, when I pull something, am I certain what direction it's going in? You can do things like, let's see, I think that there's like one of these is pull. I think also if I go to, there's a way to see like all the brushes. I think, no. Maybe because I'm in this, I think this might be something that is in the newer version. It lists like all of the things here. When you click it, yeah, you see all the pictures here, rather than having to scroll down this whole thing here. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yes. See you next week, Magnus. Thanks again. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the size of your brush, the strength of your brush, and the tool that you use. This I recommend just kind of experimenting with some of these to see what they do. And you may even you can create a really big plane and just pull on the plane and experiment with what you get. And I even think that if you go down to, like, I haven't played with this much, but I think that you can also paint directly on it. So if I click paint and I choose like a color, and then I just, set my radius down, not supported in dynamic topology mode. All right, turn that off. All right, so what you're doing right now is you're actually painting directly onto the model. And this is vertex painting. Like, it's a procedural method of applying color to the model. I suspect that you can convert that to a texture, but I'm not certain. I haven't done that. But you could see where, like, you could go a long way in creating something interesting. And then, of course, if you go back to object mode and then you take a look at it with your camera, let's see, or actually, maybe if I go to layout. Oh, it's because I don't have a camera. Maybe I should add a camera. The point being that you'd eventually want to actually render this out. Like, I probably need a light as well. Add a sun. And then my camera is way too close. Get out of here. Here it is. Look. I think I can move my camera by doing this, like lock camera to, there we go. So the point being, I can go to render image, and you can see what you've done. And of course, you could, if you wanted to save that image, you could do like image save as whatever. But it's actually not hard to find tutorials about, like, for example, okay, how do I export a 3D model so that I can use it in Unity? You would export it as a FBX, which I think I could probably just say, I mean, if you're exporting something to Unity, you want only that the 3D model that you don't want anything extra in the scene, because it will go with it in the FBX. And you don't necessarily want that extra camera or whatever. But if I do export FBX, and I think that, all right, so I think, yeah, it's got, instead of Y up, you would do Z up, and then just give it a name, like, horrific monstrosity, and then export. And so what I really encourage you to do, for example, is like, think of, like, get used to the pipeline of creating something in Blender, exporting it, taking it into Unity, and just checking out how it looks. With Blender, with Krita, with any of these additional tools that you want to connect to Unity, one of the things that's really good is exporting directly into the assets folder that is in your Unity project, because you can just jump over into Unity and it's right there, and then you can pull it into your scene. And then if you want to change that, go back to Blender, make the changes, export and save over that same file that's already in the Unity project. So you don't need to keep your FBX or your PNG texture files or whatever somewhere else. Like, export them right into your Unity project and get used to how quickly and easy it is to iterate directly from, because it doesn't matter so much how it looks in Blender. It matters how the model looks when you get it into Unity. So you really want to take advantage of that. And, you know, of course, one of the next steps will be like, okay, well, how do I get a texture onto this thing? And how do I learn how the UV map works so that I can make sure that the texture doesn't look mutilated? That's one of the challenges of making a super organic thing. I mean, you could always add a solid material to it in Unity that just gives it a color that's all the same color. That's not complicated at all. But if you want an actual image texture on it, that's when getting the UVs right becomes something really important. So that may be one of the challenges of doing something hyper organic, is that you have to figure out how to get the texture, or the UVs and the texture looking right. Which again, software is getting better at doing it automatically. Like these are the kind of things that, like when I was going to school, like, you know, decades ago, like trying to make a really low poly model and doing all the UVs by hand was super laborious. And, you know, people used to brag about how few poly, it's like, look at how good that game character is. It's only 150 polys. If you told somebody that you made a game character and it only has 150 polys now, like they just laugh at you and be like, that's ridiculous. You know, we're making a game in Unreal 5 and our main character has like 2 million polys. Like the thing that you're making is, what are you making it for, like mobile or something? Like it's ridiculous.
Like you see like N64 stuff like that, like character has like 10 polygons.
Yeah.
Now like a character in a fighting game, just like their right arm has 1,000
Yeah.
on the mobile.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the demo scene, if you've ever heard of it. People who make like essentially like games that like could fit on, you know, 512 megabytes on, you know, like ridiculously small. And that's become almost like, you know, a hobbyist thing now. It's like very retro. Like, you know, oh, we made this experience or this thing that fits into an insanely small amount of memory. Because there's still a craft to that. Nobody appreciates it as much anymore, except for these kind of niche hobbyists. But it's still impressive.
But I feel like cloud compression in general has like become less and less like permanent.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like if you see, for example, Call of Duty, which is like 120, oh, they didn't compress the sound files, but like certain renderings are just fully in. So it's gonna take 40 gigs instead of like 10.
Yeah, another profession that I see that's probably at risk is, you know, right now you can be a technical animator and be somebody who's an expert at rigging characters or rigging animals for animation. But rigging is very quickly becoming something that's becoming automated. If you have a humanoid, like in Unreal, you can just like, you know, like remap a humanoid rig to something. But even complex characters, like AI is rigging them now to the degree that like I wouldn't be surprised if like those kind of jobs start becoming like much less common or absorbed into, oh, as an animator, you use software that auto rigs the thing that you create.
Same thing with other things like topology.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, that you kind of had to make your topology kind of make sure that every frame, every render was like properly. You don't want to try like a penguin at 3D. You don't want triangles. There's apps that in Unity, like in Blender, you can actually it's an add-on that actually will like go through your topology and fix like 80% of it.
Yeah.
I remember like hearing my sister's classmates kind of being like, "Nah, man, that's AI, that's bullshit." Kind of like fighting about it.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, is there anything that you either are still having trouble understanding, could use a demo of, or something that I didn't teach you that you would love to know?
There's so much I don't know that I don't even know where.
I think that a good thing to give yourself, if you want to develop this skill, a good thing to do is just to start by saying, okay, every day I'm going to open it and I'm going to just dabble and try to do something for like 15 minutes and get in the habit of it. And along the way, you'll say like, okay, now I feel comfortable doing this and I want to add one new skill or ability. Like today I want to learn how to apply a texture to my model. Today I want to learn, if your aspirations are to learn how to animate, you could learn how to animate in Blender, which of course is much more complicated. But it is something where it's like there's so much to learn, but like I said, like there's entire aspects here that you may never use. Like for example, like this texture painting thing is almost like you could paint your textures in Blender, like, which is almost like saying there's Photoshop in Blender. And so chances are, like, you like personally, I would use Krita instead and then just import that. But like if you're a person who like all you have access to is Blender, and you're like, okay, well, you could learn all of these things. There's a video editor in here where you can do compositing. Like, like it's kind of crazy because like, yeah, it's probably easier to do this in specialized programs outside of Blender. But if you really don't want to leave Blender, you can make a movie in Blender, which people have done. So, I mean, it's kind of, and I think it's mainly because it is open source. And so anybody who said, I really wish Blender had this, there's somebody who's like, I can make that for you. And they did, and it's kind of amazing. And it has been something that's been developed for decades. And so it's been continually improved for quite a long time. And that's why it's such a good tool now.
Especially if like you look in the right, like the server or the right place, they will give you an add-on that like whatever issue you're kind of like struggling, the add-on will either optimize it, have a tutorial how to do it, and then like help you do it, and then like also teach you how to do it. So the tutorial also explains what's the issue.
Yeah. There are a bunch of different like kind of marketplaces where you can find Blender add-ons and such like that. And I'm pretty sure there's even like, there's an area here that you manage all of your add-ons through. Is it in preferences? Yeah, so preferences, add-ons. So there's a ton of add-ons that come with Blender that aren't enabled. So that you could literally, like, it's literally in here and all you have to do is like click a button. Also, these are written in Python. So if you know Python, you can write your own Blender tools. The other thing is, because it's written in Python, if you go and tell ChatGPT, I'm using Blender and I want the ability to do this, ChatGPT will be like, I'll write you a Python script to do that. It'll do it, it'll write it, you just save that as a text file and bring it in to Blender, and Blender runs it. So yeah, so that's essentially the Blender intro. Like, I didn't want to overload you. I wanted to give you just enough to get started. And then if there's other things that you would want to learn in the future and you're part of future versions of this class, of course, I'll help teach you. But then to give you an idea of the intention for, we have one more class left, and that's the class for next week. And so the intention, just like we did with the intro class, is to say, okay, you've learned a lot of different things in this class. What I want to ask you to do is to take some of those things you learned and come up with something like a final project. Doesn't even have to be a game, but I just want you to take the tools you've learned, take inspiration from them, trying to bring some of it together, and then come to next class with your work in progress. I'm not expecting a completed project, of course. But what I'd like is for you to come in and show me something that you have that's a work in progress. We can talk about challenges that you've had, where you want to go next, and I can give you feedback. And if you want to take advantage of the opportunity, you've got play testers here, of course, and we can play each other's experiences and give feedback on that. And I just find that that's a nice way to kind of wrap up the class. And then, we'll go out to eat afterwards and just kind of celebrate the end of the class. So think on that. And then also note that if you want to bounce ideas off me, or if you have anything you get stuck on, don't hesitate to ping me through Discord, and I'll help you. You can share your project with me, or I can point you in the right direction. So don't feel blocked and think, well, I won't be able to figure this out until the next class. I'm glad to help you in between classes, and I have bandwidth for that.
Do we have a list somewhere of all the subjects?
No, but that's a really good thing to have. And so what I'll do is I'll leave myself a reminder to do precisely that. And the way I do that is I send myself an email. because my unopened email is my to-do list, either that or my calendar. So what I'll do is intermediate class recap of what was what was taught, and I'll make sure along with the YouTube video of this class, which I put up on the YouTube channel. I'll also post that to the Discord. And of course, that's one thing you do have is all of the YouTube, I think I recorded all but the first couple, like the first 2 classes I wasn't recording. I'm recording this. There's also the recordings from the intro class that are on the same YouTube. So, if you want to, revisit any of the things you learned from the previous class, let's see. So in case you haven't checked it out, if you go to YouTube and you look for, if you just search for divergent neurons, what's going to come up is somebody else's sponsored content first, and then my mug. And you should totally like and subscribe to my channel. But you'll see, in addition to the video that was taken at Nordic Game Conference, there's all of the videos from the various classes. So you can see, all of the intro classes and all the intermediate classes, as well as one I recorded about setting up version control, which of course, if you're going to do any project of any decent size, it's really wise to be using version control to back it up.
One thing that I guess I didn't
Mm-hmm.
do you know how we could get a mannequin into here? Like, do you have to download that off the internet? It doesn't seem to be.
I don't think it's built into Blender. Like I said, it's built into some other modeling programs. But I think that if you were to, if you search for mannequin free FBX, chances are you can find something like those. And essentially you're looking for Blender can import most common formats. So the common formats are FBX, OBJ, and then 3ds or .max. And there are some places where you're going to pay for them, but chances are it wouldn't be too hard to find a place where you can find one for free. And including, you may even be able to find some, for example, in the Unity Asset Store or Unreal or something. And so since it's for your learning purposes, grabbing one of those should be just fine. But yeah, just searching for mannequin in mannequin FBX, or I've heard of CG Trader and Turbo Squid as well. So Turbo Squid has been around for a long time. So and that's a great way to have a good starting point. And so then, of course, you center it in the scene, and then you use mirroring. And even if you have problems with mirroring along the way, one of the things you can do is make one side the way you want it, and then there's a method for chopping it in half down the center, taking that, duplicating it, and mirroring it, and then fusing it together. So there are ways that you can, even if your mirroring's not working for whatever reason, you can make it.
That you can also do a lot of people do is mirror their drawing, so it's just the exact same in both sides, and then they go back into it and just modify things
So this is the software that I bought for iPad that I actually like quite a lot, which is if you have an iPad and you can use your fingers, or you can use an iPad pen, or just I use one of the cheap €30 pens. What's nice about Nomad Sculpt here is it's like I said, a one-time payment of €20, and it does this kind of it's really good at doing organic stuff. And it actually is, it's an interesting feel to be drawing directly on the screen and doing this kind of work. You can totally hook up a tablet to your computer and do it with Blender. But even then, unless you have one of those Cintiq monitors or whatever, you're still drawing down here and looking at the screen. I think there's another there's a free software, there's a free 3D software that I've been using as well that is more like Hard Surface, and I'm trying to remember what it is. If you ask me, I can post it in the chat.
Another one I know that is not free, Click Studio Paint is both 2D and 3D.
Mm-hmm.
They come with a 3D model whenever you open it.
Mm-hmm.
So that one is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the free one that Forger, I think this is the one. Yeah, this is, you can do soft stuff, but it has hard stuff, and it's free. It's made by Maxon, and so and I found it to be pretty decent as far as like 3D modeling on the iPad. And I'm not using a fancy iPad Pro or anything. I'm using like my kid's old iPad because she moved on to something better. So, but the cool thing about working in things like this is you generally like save it to your Google Drive and then bring it down from Google Drive onto your computer and then getting it into Unity, and that works pretty good. And then as far as like a Photoshop alternative on iPad, I use Affinity Designer. And so that's another like pay for it once and you have it. So if you like working on your iPad and you want something that's essentially like Photoshop or Krita on the iPad, then I'd recommend Affinity Designer. It's funny because the iPad version is pretty cheap, but then the desktop version is actually quite expensive. I think that they're trying to hook you. So.
It's the gateway. Not cheap. Now you've got a custom, so you're buying an extra system.
Yeah, it's like the free sample. Here, get you hooked. Cool. Well, that's all I have. Thinking to cut y'all loose 10 minutes early. Hope you don't mind or think you're being cheated out of like brain food.